In less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed illusion of an absolute empire came crashing down. What Queen Camilla realized behind the heavy oak doors of Sandringham House was a truth she had spent 30 years trying to outrun. She was not the ultimate master of the House of Windsor. She was merely a temporary tenant whose lease was being systematically revoked. When her private vehicle was quietly redirected away from the sovereign entrance toward a heavily obscured side gate used primarily by estate contractors, it was not an administrative oversight. It was a calculated, devastating act of visual humiliation, authorized by the one man who now holds the true keys to the kingdom. This video will unpack the silent, ruthless execution of an institutional reckoning that has been decades in the making. We will examine the hidden financial audit that exposed a secret, desperate power grab by Camilla to secure the royal lineage and property assets for her own non-royal children. We will uncover how Prince William, weaponizing the absolute bureaucratic power of the Duchy of Cornwall, discovered the paper trail and orchestrated a bloodless retaliation that left the Queen Consort completely isolated within her own palace. By the end of this story, you will understand how the ultimate game of royal chess is won, not with public shouting matches, but with the quiet changing of security codes and the devastating realization that behind the crown, she actually owns nothing. To understand the sheer magnitude of this collapse, we must first look at the height from which Camilla fell. For 3 decades, she played the long game with a patience that baffled her loudest critics. She survived the intense public fury of the 90s, weathered the enduring ghost of Princess Diana, and successfully executed a slow, methodical erasure of her predecessor's legacy. Step by step, she transformed herself from the most hated woman in Britain into a crowned Queen Consort, standing alongside King Charles at the absolute pinnacle of state power. With Charles on the throne, her confidence morphed into a sense of absolute invincibility. She began to treat the centuries-old institution not as a sacred trust to be protected, but as a private family business to be exploited. Viewers noticed a subtle but undeniable shift in royal protocol. Her non-royal children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, who had previously occupied the distant, quiet fringes of royal life, suddenly found themselves at the center of prominent state events. There were whispered reports of Camilla pushing for formal royal titles, or at the very least, permanent residential security and grand estate properties funded entirely by the crown. She believed she had Charles completely controlled, isolating him from dissenting voices and convincing him that her family was the only true loyalty he had left. It was a masterful display of public relations rehabilitation, a multi-million-dollar illusion designed to mask what analysts now see as a deep-seated commercial desperation. But the illusion of absolute power is a fragile thing, especially when it confronts the hard reality of British constitutional law. The turning point occurred when King Charles began facing his highly publicized health battles, forcing a shadow of uncertainty over the future of the monarchy. In the quiet corridors of Clarence House and Sandringham, a sense of urgency took hold within Camilla's inner circle. What appears to be true is that she recognized her window of absolute influence was closing rapidly. Behind the scenes, she allegedly initiated a quiet administrative maneuver to alter the long-term lease structures and financial provisions for several key properties within the Sandringham and Windsor estates. Her objective was clear, yet incredibly dangerous. She sought to secure permanent, rent-free royal footprints and generational trust funds for her own children before the crown inevitably shifted to the next generation. She knew that once William ascended the throne, her influence would instantly evaporate. Therefore, she attempted to slip these structural adjustments through the royal trust, while Charles was at his most vulnerable, relying on his deep devotion to sign off on the paperwork without alarming the wider household. It was a high-stakes gamble born out of a stark realization that despite her crown, she had no legal claim to the vast wealth of the monarchy. However, she severely underestimated the vigilant protective anger of Prince William. As the Prince of Wales, William does not just inherit a historic title. He inherits the Duchy of Cornwall, a massive billion-dollar portfolio of land and property that operates with complete financial independence from the sovereign. When William assumed full operational control of the duchy, he did something Camilla never anticipated. He ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of every financial asset, every grace and favor lease, and every private payroll expense connected to the royal estates. What his legal and financial teams uncovered was a complex paper trail of unauthorized requests and pending adjustments aimed at diverting royal resources to the Parker Bowles family. For William, this was not just a breach of administrative protocol. It was a profound moral outrage. It was a direct threat to the legacy of his mother, Princess Diana, and a staggering exploitation of his father's compromised health. It was an attempt to dismantle the institutional purity that his wife Catherine had sacrificed so much to uphold through her own uncomplaining service. William recognized that a line had been crossed, and the response would be absolute. The retaliation was not loud, nor was it leaked to the tabloid press to create a cheap public scandal. Instead, William used the cold, unyielding machinery of the system to execute a silent destruction of Camilla's carefully laid plans. He did not confront her in a screaming match across a drawing room. He simply weaponized administrative protocol. The first blow fell silently on the payroll sheets. William quietly authorized the removal of several key members of Camilla's personal entourage from the duchy's funding, shifting the financial burden entirely onto her private accounts. Then came the physical, visual manifestation of her loss of status. The security codes for the main gates at Sandringham were updated, and a new directive was issued to the Royal Protection Command. When Camilla arrived at the estate expecting her usual seamless royal entry through the grand gates, the heavy iron barriers remained firmly shut. The vehicle came to an abrupt halt. Through the tinted glass, the Queen Consort watched as a senior estate official approached her security detail with a clipboard rather than a traditional bow. She was informed that under the new administrative guidelines approved directly by the Prince of Wales, her access had been restricted to the secondary service entrances. Her electronic passes to the sovereign's private wings had been neutralized. It was the exact moment the trap snapped shut with absolute icy precision. Stranded outside the main entrance of the very estate she thought she controlled, Camilla picked up her encrypted phone to demand an immediate intervention from the king. But as the line rang out into an empty, devastating silence, she looked out the window and realized the terrifying truth. The king was not going to answer, and the empire she had spent 30 years building had just been dismantled without a single word being spoken. The silence on the other end of that encrypted line was not just a dropped call. It was the definitive sound of a changing era. For decades, King Charles had been Camilla's ultimate shield, rewriting royal history and confronting his own family to place the crown upon her head. But that afternoon, as the phone rang out outside the locked gates of Sandringham, the Queen Consort faced the most devastating psychological climax of her royal life. The king did not answer. It was not because he had suddenly ceased to care, but because he had finally submitted to the unyielding reality of his own mortality and the absolute constitutional power of his heir. Faced with a choice between protecting his wife's private ambitions and securing the long-term survival of the monarchy through Prince William Charles chose the crown. His silence was a non-verbal abdication of his role as her protector, leaving Camilla to face the freezing wind of institutional isolation alone. To truly comprehend the depth of this collapse, we must unpack the stark financial reality that this side-door incident exposed. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of her empire, revealing a state of profound commercial desperation. The public often mistakes the grandeur of a queen for genuine ownership, but the hard truth of the British monarchy is that Camilla owns absolutely nothing within the royal estate. She does not own Buckingham Palace, she does not own Clarence House, and she does not own a single acre of Sandringham. Every square inch of those historic lands belongs either to the Crown Estate or to the Duchy of Cornwall, which is now under the absolute legally binding control of Prince William. That detail matters because it completely alters the balance of power behind closed doors. Unlike traditional royal dowagers of the past, who brought vast family fortunes or sovereign alliances to the table, Camilla's position is entirely conditional. Her private wealth is heavily tied to her personal property, Ray Mill House, a residence she kept precisely because she knew the royal palaces would never truly be hers. Once King Charles's reign concludes, her status as Queen Consort instantly vanishes, reverting to that of a Queen Dowager with no constitutional authority, no automatic right to reside in sovereign properties, and no claim to the duchy's massive financial revenues. By cutting off the funding for her unofficial staff and forcing her vehicle to the service entrance, William was not just changing a security protocol, he was giving her a cold forensic preview of her future. He was reminding her that her absolute power was an illusion, a temporary privilege that could be revoked with a single stroke of a pen from the Prince of Wales. This brings us to the profound emotional core of this institutional warfare, where the silent dismantling of Camilla's influence directly aligns with the restoration of a deeply cherished legacy. For years, the public watched as Camilla carefully navigated the palace corridors, gradually minimizing the memory of Princess Diana and keeping the Middleton family at a calculated distance to project an image of undisputed supremacy. But the system has a long memory. The return of Prince William and Princess Catherine to the absolute center of royal authority represents a quiet, devastating vindication for those who were once sidelined. Catherine's uncomplaining sacrifice and dignified endurance during her recent health struggles created a powerful, undeniable contrast with Camilla's frantic behind-the-scenes property maneuvers. While one was sacrificing her privacy to preserve the stability of the institution, the other appeared to be exploiting a moment of vulnerability to secure generational wealth for her non-royal children. The institutional retaliation was executed not out of malice, but out of a strict necessity to protect the moral purity of the crown. Viewers of recent royal gatherings have already begun to spot the subtle symbolic clues of this shifting hierarchy. That is where the story changes, shifting away from palace gossip into visible historical proof. Observers noted that during a recent state reception, a prominent portrait of Princess Diana, which had been quietly moved to a less visible gallery during the early days of the new reign, had been restored to its rightful prominent position in the main drawing room. Furthermore, the historic jewelry collection, which Camilla had heavily relied upon to project her sovereign status, has seen a quiet redistribution. The iconic pieces most closely associated with Diana's memory are now being explicitly reserved for the Princess of Wales, ensuring that the visual lineage of the future monarchy skips Camilla entirely. The shift is even more evident in the administrative layout of the upcoming royal summer schedules. The Parker Bowles family, who had slowly been integrating themselves into the private guest lists of Balmoral and Sandringham, have reportedly found their access heavily restricted under new guidelines issued by the Prince of Wales's office. There will be no grand royal footprints for her children, no state-funded security details for her extended family, and no permanent leases carved out of the sovereign estate. The boundary between the true royal bloodline and those who temporarily marry into it has been firmly, ruthlessly re-established. Ultimately, this story resonates far beyond the immediate individuals involved because it exposes the terrifying vulnerability that lies beneath the highest levels of ambition. Camilla spent 30 years engineering an improbable rise to the throne, mastering the art of the long game and surviving every scandal thrown her way. Yet, in a single 48-hour period, she was reminded that without institutional equity, absolute power is nothing more than a lease that can be cancelled at any moment. As the heavy iron gates of Sandringham remained closed, forcing her toward the side entrance used by contractors and staff, the illusion finally broke. She was left with the devastating realization that the system she sought to manipulate had simply absorbed her presence, used her for a season, and was now preparing to move on without her. As the House of Windsor transitions into this strict protective new era, under the watchful eye of Prince William and Princess Catherine, the balance of power has permanently shifted. The strategic antagonist has met an institutional reckoning that no amount of public relations can fix. What do you think about William's silent execution of this administrative retaliation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and consider subscribing as we continue to analyze the deep hidden dynamics shaping the future of the British monarchy.